and welcome to another episode of the Real Returns Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Reichert, and I'm joined with my co-host, Dan Croce. Dan, how are we today?
I am doing well. Great to be here. Excited for another interview today. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. We got an exciting guest who I'm actually going to let Dan introduce, since Dan and our guest, Evan Addams, have actually had a long-time relationship and actually do some work together. So, Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest for today?
Happy to do that. We today are joined by Evan Addams. Evan is a friend of mine. We actually went to college together once upon a time. In 2010, I guess we met. So 12 years ago, something like that. These days, by day, he's a technology entrepreneur. He's led sales functions in a variety of high-growth tech startups, but he's also involved in the real estate business. He has his own direct-to-consumer coffee company. So he's got his hands dipped in a handful of baskets. Today we're actually primarily going to interview him about his experience in the bed and breakfast industry, which is a niche of the real estate world that's pretty interesting, and he's got some unique perspective to provide. So Evan, you want to say a few words and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get into this topic today. Often I speak more in regards to technology and what's happening in the startup space. And as all that comes crashing down, it'll be fun today to shift gears. And it's been particularly fun as more and more folks are venturing into real estate, Airbnb, and their first investments to find this niche, and Dan, getting to work a little with you there too. So I'm honored to be here. Great respect for what you guys have going on, and excited for the podcast here.
Awesome. So why don't you, for starters, so I know that you do some stuff in the real estate space more broadly. So why don't you start by giving us an overview, just what your exposure to the real estate industry has been like. For our listeners, give them a sense for what your involvement has been with the asset class.
Yeah, absolutely. I ventured into this maybe similar to how a number of part-time investors have. I've always fancied myself as a cheap person, and when I came out of school, that was 2010, as you mentioned, Dan, I couldn't imagine renting a place for $800 a month and just never seeing that again. So my first investment was a house hack into a duplex where I could get somebody else to pay my rent for me, basically, from the other tenants, and I would get equity in a building. That seemed like a deal that was too good to be true. And I was shocked that not everybody in the world at that point was in real estate. And so on a small-time basis, we've added a couple of multi-unit buildings to our, when I say our, I mean my wife and I, our portfolio, to up to, I think, 12, 13 units total now, just over the last 10 years. Every once in a while, when there seems like a good buy, we've done that. We've also paid a lot of attention to the primary residence move. So my wife and I have gone through a couple primary residence moves in the last 10 years where we've purchased foreclosed homes, fixed those up, and taken advantage of what has been a growing, I just saw today, highest median sales price ever in the U.S. for primary homes. So right now, on top of the typical rental real estate, my wife and I are going through a restoring of a historic home, our primary residence here, and seeing equity increase in that. So that had been my primary exposure to real estate until for the last year or so I've been in the bed and breakfast space.
Cool. And one thing I know about your portfolio as well is that you're very community minded. In fact, you have one space that is intended to be sort of a community asset that's a gathering place. And so long before I know you had an interest in being a hospitality real estate operator, you've had an interest in thinking about how real estate makes an impact and plays a role in the community setting. Can you talk a little bit about that what that's looked like for you and your passion.
Thanks. That's a great tee up. I've never fancied myself as purely looking at just the best financial returns. Perhaps that's why right away in my professional career, real estate attracted me as compared to a steady, say, 10+% return by putting money into a fund, a mutual fund, or something that's going to be mostly stock market indexed. The nature of real estate and being able to put your hands on an investment and see that you're providing shelter, providing care, and in many cases providing community for folks, where you live, whether you think about it or not, where your kids are growing up, the people they're growing up around has a profound impact on families. So one of our spaces was purposely a mixed-use building where there's residential and commercial space. And the reason for that is we wanted to take one of the commercial spaces and use it for community purposes. It is a shared office space that has had a few companies come in and out and use that space. I've benefited personally in my tech career from that type of community. We've used that space to rent out for birthday parties, wedding showers, bridal showers. There's been a church that has used it for their early stage of their development and their administrative meetings. The list goes on for that. So we've in some of those cases seen a non-traditional revenue path, and that's worthwhile to us because we make sure on the broad sense the building is tracking correctly to the pro forma, our NOI is hitting. Those things matter for us to run a healthy portfolio, but it's along the way, are you having the person-to-person impact that really makes it worth it? And thank you for bringing it up. That is a major driver for us on our investment path.
Cool. Well, let's pivot here to the primary topic of the day, which is pretty interesting and unique, as I mentioned. I know that you are a bed and breakfast operator, and you have a growing portfolio of hospitality assets. Don't know too many people, especially people in their early 30s, who are building portfolios of bed and breakfast. So tell us, what is the story there? How did that concept get on your radar? What's the passion for it? And just give us a little bit of the backstory as to how you tiptoed your way into the B&B space.
And often when I say we, I'll keep clarifying this, but my wife and I are a team, and so when I talk about we, it's that she's my ethereal other person here. Anytime that my wife and I have traveled in the last, since we've been married, going on 10 years here, we have found a certain touch related to bed and breakfasts that allows us to get to know a local community and make a different type of experience for ourselves compared to a big box hotel. We spent our honeymoon in Ireland, Scotland area, stayed at bed and breakfast, and some of those families that we stayed with, those small hotels we stayed in, are still friends to this day. We did the same thing traveling through Germany and Italy, and have a few pieces of art hang on our walls that are drawn by the owners of these bed and breakfasts, and so you build that sense. When it came time, as we now have a few kids, and we started to look at, okay, well, what other type of family investments make sense? We started to think about, do we do a second home that we can rent out as a vacation home? It allows us to have some flexibility as a family to go somewhere. Well, it's been the last probably 2 to 3 years we've started to explore that route, as a lot of people do who are thinking in the real estate world. We came back to what experiences had been meaningful for our family, and we couldn't get away from this bed and breakfast type of interaction. As we started to look at the market, we found a very intimate and making up a word here, but unprofessionalized industry where it was very difficult to find bed and breakfast for sale or understand the financials of a bed and breakfast. And I was coming from a world where when I wanted to get to an NOI on a multi-unit building, I was a couple clicks away from being able to do that at any hour of the night. And as we started to explore bed and breakfasts and wonder, well, what is the business? Is there a business there? What is there, how do I calculate an NOI? We realized that there weren't a lot of people playing in that space because some of that data was hard to get to. And between our passion for that space, just personally, we enjoyed it. We say investments that inspire. Anytime you walk into a historic property, you get that sense of, wow, I'm being a part of, I'm experiencing something that goes beyond my lifetime. I'm walking into a house or an estate that's hundreds of years old, or in Europe, thousands of years old in some cases. And you get outside of yourself. You break away from the mundane, break away from getting stuck in your own, day to day, and it inspires you. We wanted to put our money into that space, but we also realized we might be walking into an industry that has opportunity to apply some strong business principles learned in, say, the typical real estate investor market that aren't necessarily applied in this niche area. And that was our entry point of when our exploration started, and we've made some investments since then. But that's really how we got into it.
Yeah, I love the origin story, Evan, and I love hearing just your passion for people and community. If I may, I'd like to ask a bit of a rudimentary question. My guess is a lot of our listeners hear B&B and they immediately think Airbnb. Obviously, that's a huge industry. And so can you just contrast your business model to Airbnb? And are there any corollaries? Are there any overlap between what you're doing and kind of the Airbnb business model?
There are corollaries. But to be clear, and I'm glad you asked that as well. When we say B&B, bed and breakfast, we're talking an operational business that runs as typically a small hotel as compared to the Airbnb model of renting out a whole home by itself. What's become purely touchless, which has a lot of benefits, and renting out a third floor space. In this case, bed and breakfast, we're referring to that traditional sense of you're going to a large house or a small hotel that's set up. Usually it looks like a house. Ours was, in this case, our first investment in Florida is an 11-bedroom home that was actually built as a small hotel 140 years ago. And we serve breakfast in the morning. We have a cleaning crew that comes through every day. We have a manager of it. And so as opposed to running this with, say, a property manager that checks in every once a week or so, we do run this more like a small hotel and business.
Yeah, that's helpful. And how about any corollaries, any similarities? Do you find that people that are renting out their third floor of their house feel like they're in the hospitality business? Are they putting out a breakfast and trying to have that high touch feel, or do you find that they're pretty different?
I think the corollaries have a lot to do with the guests. And we're talking about nightly rentals, long weekends, that sort of experience. The corollaries start to spread when a guest is using Airbnb for week-plus long excursions. And if that's the mentality that a guest goes to Airbnb with, I would say as a renter or a property owner, a host, if you're setting up your properties to be long-term, 7-day, 5 or 6 day plus experiences, that somebody's renting a facility from you for, a couple of days and they just want to have the bones of things to make their own. That is a different experience than us. I do still believe that's hospitality, but any of us who've gone on vacation for a week, you don't really want to be somewhere and think about it like somebody else's house, right? You want to be somewhere and think about it as your own place for a week and be very comfortable. But the corollaries alternatively are when someone comes in and they say, I want to be, right now I've targeted historic areas. So when someone goes to Savannah, Georgia, and they say, wow, I want to be right off the park, right off of the main drag. I want to be in Savannah. I want to be in a historic property, and I'm going to be there for a Friday through a long weekend here. And they get to be a part of that type of experience where they're walking into a room knowing that they're not trying to make it their own per se, but they want to dive into that community and culture. When Airbnbs are in a similar experience there with the guests, that is how I'd say the corollaries go. To this point, though, most of my traffic is not driven from specifically the Airbnb brokerage, I'll call it. A lot of our traffic does come through. Actually, we do a lot of direct traffic of folks looking to stay in a specific area. So I would say there's, depending on what's looked for, you'll get some different experiences.
Evan, in general, the theme of what we like to talk about on Real Returns is the way that the dollars that we allocate into real estate can have impact on the world around us, above and beyond just the net cash on cash return or IRR. And I know you and I have talked a good bit. The bed and breakfast model is certainly an interesting one financially, but I know that you have a lot of passion for it because of the way in which it can impact people's lives. In fact, you've used the term pandemic of loneliness as something that you see that sort of exists in society today. And from what I understand, I think you have viewed your involvement in this industry as a way to intentionally combat that pandemic. Talk to me about, I think many of our listeners most likely have never stayed at a bed and breakfast, and so they don't really know what that experience is like. What are you trying to do in terms of the way that you impact the human experience with this business beyond the dollars and cents?
I'll share specific stories, and I'll keep them anonymous, but I think that might be the most meaningful here. When I say pandemic of loneliness, which is such a large phrase, it feels weird to even say that. But truly, coming out of the last couple of years, we're meeting people at the bed and breakfast that have ventured out of their house virtually for the first time since March of 2020. And we've had guests stay with us who are even somewhat local, where it's their first time feeling confident to go anywhere besides a grocery store and a few necessary places. So there is an immediate level of, can we provide a hands-on experience that is, when we think hospitable, we're not talking about just great decor, Instagram worthy. We're talking about cleanliness. We're talking about thoughtfulness. We're talking about a space that allows somebody to feel safe and confident to break out of isolation or some version of social distancing for the last 2 years. That's one piece of it. The other is, I used this phrase earlier, investments that inspire. So that would be an experience that is curated to the point that actually drives you out of the mundane. As somebody who used to work in an office and travel virtually all the time, it's nice to be home. It feels really good, but before you know it, you're locked away in your home office for the better part of a year, and you realize that you haven't had the human-to-human interactions as much. One of my coworkers used a phrase recently, it's very quickly you accidentally grow sharp elbows. You get a little more upset with people than you would because maybe you lose some empathy, you don't see what they're going through and they don't see what you're going through. And so we try to create these curated experiences that encourage you to come out and break off those the comfort of working from your PJs, and do something. I'll share, when I said real stories, we have had recently, in the last couple of weeks, we had someone celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary with us because they had celebrated their wedding, their honeymoon, their wedding night and honeymoon at this exact building 40 years ago, under a different name at the time, but it was a hotel bed and breakfast then. And they came back and were just thoroughly pleased to see the life that was flourishing there. That same weekend, we had guests become engaged to be married at the doorstep of their room because the atmosphere and the experience, the coloring meant so much to them. And they anticipate being back for some wedding and post-wedding festivities. As joyous as those were, we also had a scenario a couple of days after that where we had a guest stay with us where one of their adult children was facing a terminal illness that was sudden and had a terrible prognosis. And they needed these grandparents now with their adult children and their grandchildren. They needed to spend 2 or 3 nights of strategy and game planning. And so they were so thankful that we had created a space that allowed them not to forget about their troubles, but to be able to catch their breath and see what was next for them. And as we provide that space, we're hopefully fighting against that pandemic of loneliness. And Dan, you brought up that community space in one of my Pittsburgh area buildings. That type of theme, creating spaces that allow people to go on this community journey, is what we're looking to do.
I love that. That's so cool. I think you do put yourself at a very unique intersection, a unique place in people's lives, whether it's that they need a break from the day-to-day or they're getting away for celebratory purposes, whatever that reason is. You have a really unique opportunity by the nature of your business to make an impact on them. Can you talk about what are the ways that you try to be intentional about that? What do you do to differentiate yourself from any other bed and breakfast operator, or how do you roll up your sleeves, be it through yourself or your team, to go above and beyond to actually make a meaningful impact on people's lives?
Well, this I'll bring back into, while it's a great community-oriented question, I actually think about the business side of it a little bit more. I mentioned the phrase earlier, an unprofessionalized industry. And I mean this with great respect for the hospitality you could walk into any bed and breakfast with, and you're going to find an owner, usually the data that I can get on this is virtually all bed and breakfasts you walk into are owner operated. And so when you walk in, you're going to receive a touch from that owner. That's great. That is their primary source of income as well. And so the approach that owner operator takes is one that you might usually see in a small business. What happens with that is as you're running, you're making breakfast, you're turning rooms over, you're running a property, there's not necessarily as much time to proactively build a network and community of your guests. So what we do that we believe is unique, and this might be when we talk about concepts like growth edge or competitive advantage, I am primarily from the tech, high growth, customer success, customer oriented background. So I think about how to use technology to deepen relationships with customers, or in this case that we're talking about, guests. We invest into our business so that as an owner, I'm thinking more strategically about not just surviving the day, not just getting all the rooms turned, but we take away from our margins by investing into a housekeeping team, a management team, something that most bed and breakfasts do not have. As those teams operationally run the inn and have great individual interactions with the guests, we use some softwares and other approaches to understand how many times has that guest been there, what notes on what did they do last time they were here. We engage that guest and actually, can help them somewhat plan their stays. Every time you walk into our bed and breakfast in Florida, you will find your name as a guest with some sort of note that depicts a little bit of a loyalty group, but very intimate, depicts, thank you for being here. It's your 7th time here with us. And we might make recommendations of, hey, I know that you went to Michael's Steakhouse last time you were here. There's a new executive chef in town. You got to go to this restaurant. And we give bespoke recommendations in that way. You'll find that based on preferences. And there's some lessons taken, I would say, from high luxury hospitality, maybe a Ritz-Carlton style. You can steal some lessons there. You can take lessons from customer success of how your favorite tech company might interact with you and thank you as a recurring customer. You'll see that with us. And in this post-pandemic era, we still make a high effort to have transparency into our cleanliness and compliance overall, which has gone a long way for our market, which has tended to be those with time and flexible income, typically close to a retirement age, and there's a sensitivity around some COVID and post-pandemic compliance that we think we excel in.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense, and I love that you guys go above and beyond to be intentional with that, so that you can really accomplish your mission. Something that I wonder about is how you think about the future of your type of business. Andrew mentioned the Airbnb contrast, and I think with our generation and up and coming generations, when they think about a travel experience, they are really typically wanting to optimize for convenience, and the fact that they might have to interact with a stranger might actually be a deterrent for them. And so, but I love the mission of what bed and breakfasts are, and that they want to force people to come out of their comfort zone a little bit, connect with the person next door. So how do you think about for the next generation, convincing them to not just get an Airbnb, but to put themselves in a situation where they might have to actually interact with a stranger?
That is a fun effort. The jury is still out on to say exactly, fast forward this next generation 20 years, what will this market look like? What will the B&B, what will the consumer demand market look like for this in 25 years exactly? It's impossible to tell. We see it as our job as entrepreneurs to, in borrowing this phrase actually from a friend of all of ours, Dan, I know you know Sean, when I say entrepreneurs create the world how it ought to be. And so we do take this as a charge that we believe a certain type of experience, not to make force somebody to sit down and have a meal with us if they don't want to, right? You can't force that. But can you create an interaction that is less isolating? And even if someone feels a little on edge about that, can we pull them over the line to create that experience more how it ought to be? We think it's moving community in the right way. We're making investments in eyeing things like, I'll call them community spaces or gathering spaces. So is there a way to enhance verandas, parlors, something that is big enough and wide enough that you can sit quietly and read a book by yourself in a beautiful open area, but can you also engage at a pool table or at a large table? We're looking at things like not just 2-seater breakfast tables, but can we look at tables of 4 or 6 that might pull you in to sit near somebody and have an engagement with them? The other piece of this is we're gearing ourselves up well for the future so that hybrid becomes more feasible. I think it's an advantage for us, and why I believe in investing in this space on this theme of there's opportunity in the modernized approach here, because I do think bed and breakfast owners will need to adapt and find ways to engage that slightly touchless experience, at least a bit. So by taking principles from the Airbnb market, and more recent to this, you called it the next generation, applying those so that something maybe like the checkout experience is more painless. Right now, you've got a physical key that you have to wait in line and hand back in while someone goes and does a room check, and that takes time in a typical bed and breakfast, or the front desk person just isn't there, and so you're waiting and waiting and waiting, like waiting for your check at a restaurant or something like that. How can we create some better transactions and interactions, and we see it as an opportunity to expand the B&B experience to a digital one that engages you on your phone everywhere you go, but still pulls you in that check-in process, the opportunity to have breakfast. So it's a long answer for you, Dan. I think the magic sauce is that our advantage, specifically my portfolio's advantage, is that we are embracing the touchless but looking as a hybrid there to try to drive that forward.
Cool. I have a question on a little bit of a different thread. So, as you know, the Burgo model is really focused on what we call workforce housing. So, super affordable, accessible homes, and we care a lot about accessibility. How do you think about wanting to keep your product accessible to everyday people? Obviously, you're going to have to. It's a luxury, right? You're traveling. You're doing something that's outside of the day to day, so you're going to have to, pay up for that a little bit. But is it through? Are there ways that you can keep your product accessible so that lots of people can enjoy the benefits that come with the experience that you're trying to create?
That's a challenging question. In our limited time, although we've been dabbling in the space for a while, we've been fully operating for just about I'll say a year now. Not quite, but prices and in this case inflation has gone up, that even when we thought that our rooms were expensive, they hadn't been. As in, we constantly found other rates around us skyrocketing, and in this one of our small communities, there is a not enough inventory of nightly rentals, and so on any given night we're finding ourselves priced in the middle, even when we thought we were expensive. And so I haven't actually been able to work on that thesis, Dan, that you're talking about, because we have just comparatively been priced very competitively, and because everything else around us has skyrocketed. So the way we think about that in that context is that we've been thinking about long-term relationships with our guests. And this is artificial, and I'm not trying to be too much of an economist here, but there's some sort of intuition-led how much price increase is enough to justify a change in market, but enough to not take advantage of the guests have no other choice. So I'll use a real number for you guys. If there's a room that's $200 a night, and it's a middle of the pack room for us, and we do have guests that specifically you can tell they're not going to rent our more premium rooms that are $350 a night, that are larger. And they might be a 3 or 4 time return guest for the last couple of years. And every time they choose that room, it's one of our maybe lower priced rooms, but more economical overall. That type of room, we had a season, there were a couple weeks where that room was renting at, I would say, other similar rooms across the market were renting at $350 a night. I mean, you were seeing the price on that room almost double. We increased the price a little bit, as in we're talking about a 10 to 20% increase on that room, because the guests who came back understood. We actually had this as a quote. I didn't have it written down. A quote from one of our guests. They said, "Thank you. I was really worried when I saw the prices, and I know that this is more expensive than last year. Everything's crazy right now, but thank you for not pricing me out of this experience. This is our annual vacation for me and my husband." That was affirming to me. We made our competitive market rate. Instead of 200, we were able to keep our, cover costs and get up to, 249 or something for that particular event. We lost money compared to what our neighbors were doing, but I know that guest will come back next year. And it might be a season. It might be a season based on what we're all learning in recessions and such. That pricing will not stay up and we'll need to come back down to the 200. Who knows? But we've locked ourselves down with a guest there. So we think about it that way. We do try to use those percentages, that 10 to 20% of a surge, and then we'll watch it over the course of a seasonal period. Long-term guest experience is more important to us than seasonal boom in revenue.
Well, thanks, Evan. I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew here for our wrap-up session, but really enjoyed the deep dive on the B&B. So, Andrew, why don't you go ahead and take us home?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And yeah, thanks, Evan. It was fascinating. I learned a lot about the B&B industry just from listening to you. So appreciate your commentary there. We call this the lightning round. So I'm going to ask you just a few quick questions to get to know you a little bit better, and so that our guests can, or our listeners can hear a little bit about you as our guests. So what is your biggest win?
Biggest win? If you guys don't mind, I'll give you a quick answer. It is, in total career, my biggest win was the very first time I had an investor write me a check for anything. And that happened to be in tech. It took myself from the idea phase into somebody believes in me. And getting that very first check was like, all right, world, we're doing this thing.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I'm sure you immediately felt the weight of stewarding somebody else's capital. And I think that that's often a life-changing moment. So I love that answer. How about your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? It's called Glory. It's a Civil War, Matthew Broderick, a story of an all-black troop and their experience at the time. And it's I saw it for the first time in middle school, and found myself sobbing as a 14-year-old boy amongst all my football friends, terribly embarrassed. I've seen it many times since. I cannot stop sobbing every time I see it. It's inspirational, and it's just about the triumph of man overcoming obstacles to find a way to lay down your life for each other.
Oh, I love it. And it has great parallels to some of our conversation today, just having impact with our lives and with the work that we do. So that's fantastic. How about your favorite food?
Favorite food? I am a sandwich person. I put some meat between bread and the creativity that can occur in the midst. But it needs to be said. It needs to be said that on my wellness journey, my health journey, sandwiches, when I say it's my favorite food, it's not because I eat them often. I mean, it is like I got to put them to the side and let them go. And then someday in the great beyond, I pray that my existence is I can eat all the sandwiches my soul can take. That's what I look forward to.
That is a hilarious answer. I have a hard time taking that seriously, but I know that you're serious. So I love it. What's a current growth edge of yours? What are you working on developing personally or professionally in yourself?
Yeah, just to be thematic here, there's a book I read maybe 3 years ago called The Medici Effect, and it's about design and the power of taking two different worlds. And when you, as a design mind, when you take a traditional problem in one industry and apply the way that a totally different industry has solved a problem, you find this magic moment of maybe it's just right in front of your face of how to solve things. So for me, in my investment into B&Bs, the tech, high growth, venture backed world, the lessons learned in there about how to build, $100 million recurring revenue business or something like that, but applying that into a small operational hospitality, I'm constantly comparing notes and applying tools and practices. And I think that edge and figuring out that magic intersection there is what's going to allow the bed and breakfast portfolio to flourish, and vice versa. Things I learned about guest experiences that I can apply to tech customers allow us to give a really good customer success experience as well.
Yeah, I love that. And there are certainly many industries out there that could use some of that cross-pollination that you're talking about, of bringing in what's happening in tech and helping to develop and mature those industries. So it's really neat to see you do that in the B&B space. Last question, what's maybe some A+ content that you're taking in these days? Could be a book or a podcast or whatever kind of method you use to consume content.
Yeah, I've been doing some triangulation recently, and this is very old school of me. I still actually have one over here. I have my paper Wall Street Journal, and in the mornings I'll check my Wall Street Journal. I'll compare that with a weekly podcast. There's a few. Dan and I have taken a look at one called All In, which touches the most recent economy, but especially venture-backed companies. And then I compare that actually to what I'm seeing on our trends of booking. And there's a lot in the Wall Street Journal and otherwise about what's consumer demand doing. And so I take these learnings and editorials and I go back to our actual sales numbers on a weekly basis and look at trends of booking. Where's it coming from? Pricing. What's that look like? And it allows me to create my own personal index on what do I think consumer behavior is looking like. What am I seeing on airline stocks? So on a weekly basis, I'm trying to consume those sources of data to have my sense on what's travel look like, what are the trends on the way that my specific markets are going to see growth or guest demand, and then that affects how people are spending money, other startups that I've engaged with. So those types of things allow me to triangulate opinions about the consumer psychology that's happening out there, which is a little boring when everything's up and to the right because everything's good. But right now it's really interesting because I think we're all waiting for what is this potential shoe to drop? Does it affect rents? What does this really mean? Are we going to get through this potential recession with no injuries or what? So that's how I start to get that data, by using some of those sources.
I guess just to make the point crystal clear, the correct answer to the A+ content you're taking in is the Real Returns podcast, but
in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got the second best answer. Well, what I love about your response is it shows that not only do you consume content, but you put it into practice. I think a lot of people listen to content and they say, oh, that's interesting, and then they don't actually execute on what they're hearing or consuming. So I love that you do that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Evan. It was really good to spend some time with you today, hear a little bit about your life and your career, and also your investment in B&Bs. Hopefully our listeners got a sense for how real estate investors can have these community-based experiences and impact community with their own dollars. That's really what this podcast is all about. Our dollars have influence. And in your case, as you said, it's not really just about financial return. It's about the impact that you're having on people's lives that are guests, at your B&Bs, and also the people that you impact through the work that you're doing. So I found the conversation super fascinating. Thanks again, Evan, for your time. Thanks to our listeners for listening in. And we'll be with you again next time.